ruin the ruins. I'm sorry, I just can't get over that line that was perfectly done by Paul. Believe me, even though that this episode has a lot more going than that line alone, that line was way too memorable after years of hearing it from this episode. This episode, Steven vs. Amethyst, was a lot more interesting, and even though that I didn't watch Crack the Whip, I can still remember the elements centering around Amethyst's struggles, since that Steven took care of facing off Jasper on his own. Even though that he fused with Connie into Savani to stop Jasper, at the very least, Amethyst was really focusing on having her importance, on being better than Steven, but at the end of the day, Steven still grew as a character when it comes to his abilities. In this episode, Steven and Amethyst are training, but at the same time, Amethyst needs to be better than Steven. But no matter what, Steven improves a lot more, so when they play a video game after the training, Steven led it Amethyst to win, considering that that's what Amethyst did when it comes to the training. And to tell you the truth, guys, when I first watched this episode, I really didn't focus a lot when it comes to Steven and Amethyst's relationship. Mainly the fact that Amethyst's character really feels like she's only doing this because she feels like it, but after remembering all the episodes during my second binge watch, it gave me more of an understanding of her character. At first, watching this episode for the first time, I always think of a best friend versus best friend episode that you would see in other cartoons. It's supposed to be goofy, it's supposed to be silly sometimes, and it's mainly due to a huge misunderstanding. But believe me, since that this second rewatch, or not really second rewatch, but this second binge watch really made me understand of how Amethyst is feeling, and when it came to Steven saying that he has worse powers than her, then being the worst person, well not really worst person, but the worst warrior in this case when it comes to a battle of who is worse than each other, it really feels like that this episode was really trying a lot more when it comes to being so silly that was mainly intentional for the right reasons. Even though that these characters never state that they're the worst warrior, because in all honesty, they're nothing like warriors. They're crystal gems, which is in their own way of calling themselves warriors. But when it comes to their argument before the battle, the only thing I can think of is the fact that these two characters get along, but in comparison to Garnet and Paul, it's literally the best friend and best friend, despite the fact that Garnet is also a guardian towards Steven, to where it really feels like you can tell that Garnet and Paul were a lot more focusing on the important matters, and when it comes to Amethyst, she's always mad at herself for not improving herself. And to tell you the truth, it's really difficult for her to think of herself when she's just trying to protect Steven rather than the other way around. I feel like that this arc of Amethyst really feels similar to Paul's arc when it comes to her using Garnet for fusion in order to make herself feel better. The only difference is that Amethyst didn't cause any problems, which only make her slightly better than Paul from the last season, but then again, that kind of shows that Amethyst is having a struggle on trying to move forward, knowing full well that she didn't want it to be made. That was established way earlier in the series. As for Steven, he's mostly a goofball like in the other Beach City episodes, mainly the New Year's, but at the same time, it actually kind of works when it comes to his relationship with Amethyst. All I can think of is that he is just trying a lot more in order to see who is the worst when it comes to the crystal gems, but at the same time, this really feels like the Fred 3 movie, which I can't believe I'm bringing up in this episode review. Well, Fred gives a speech that we're the best at being the worst, and in all honesty, it's really impressive to think that this episode did this message slightly better than that movie. People may hate that movie, but at the same time, I don't hate it, but I don't like it. My point is that Steven knows that Amethyst, Paul, and Garnet are way more powerful than him, even though that he didn't realize it, that he was better than them when it comes to powers towards the end of the series. You can still understand that he is still in a position where he isn't better than anyone else. His powers were way more limited and a lot more weaker in comparison to Amethyst, Paul, and Garnet. And I understand that they may have been in good use when it comes to him learning more with his abilities improving, but at the same time, when you literally think about how that the Crystal Gems went through so much, to the point that they gave him an obstacle course in the first season in order to make it really easy, just so that Steven doesn't fail. How would he ever improve on himself, even though that in the finale of season 1, he didn't even stop the ship from taking off from Earth, since that Garnet destroyed the systems in the ship itself to the point that he realizes that he can't be able to handle a lot more than what Garnet went through. Because as far as I'm concerned, in Gem Drill, well, he manages to talk to the cluster. If he tried a different method, it wouldn't be able to work out. And if the method is mainly what Peridot did by drilling the core itself, it will probably cause a lot more problems when it comes to an alternative way. Because let me tell you, the battle between Steven and Amethyst that happened in the second half of the episode, it was humorous when it comes to the first watch, but when it comes to the second watch, all I can think of is these two characters were probably destined to fuse, while fusing with Garnet and Paul didn't greenlight immediately. I mean, I'm fully aware that the fusion between Steven and Amethyst was really memorable once we get into that fusion in the next couple of days or so, but I always got the impression that they were focusing on Steven and Amethyst's relationship when it comes to them being closer, of knowing each other, of the abilities of the positives and negatives, and how they can handle themselves alone when it comes to them hanging out the most. Even though that Steven does hang out with Paul and Garnet multiple times, and it does established in this show, this episode's silliness really felt accurate, considering that no other cartoon has done this method. Granted, they mainly do it for comedy, and in this episode, it kind of feels like comedy, but at the same time, they probably focused on having the two fuse together in the following episodes. As far as I'm concerned, when it comes to Steven's relationship with Amethyst, even if you may make the argument that it could be better or not better than the other relationships that Steven has when it comes to Paul and Garnet, the more screen time these two characters have, the more you can see the struggles of what Amethyst is feeling and how different she was in this episode in comparison to her portrayal in the first season. Granted, she does have funny moments, but at the same time, she has self-reflection and is really aware of what's really going on. Especially when it comes to her defeat after Jasper poofed her. To tell you the truth, Amethyst in this episode, on the realization after the battle between her and Steven came to an end awkwardly, I really felt like that they were really trying a lot more to give Amethyst more of a purpose, since that this second binge watch really made me understand her character a lot more. I mean, if she was gonna be like this when it comes to being a comic relief for the rest of the series, then she would have ended up like Sam from iCarly. In my opinion, this episode is mostly the beginning of Steven and Amethyst's development in the following episodes, since I've already talked about Crack the Whip in my Carnivorous videos. If anything, this episode honestly taught me that Amethyst is a lot more different in comparison to Paul and Garnet, but better in her own way. And I really feel like that in the following episodes, that the only thing that I remember the most is mainly her fusion with Steven. There's gonna be something I'm gonna miss out on during my first binge watch that I'm gonna be revisiting and probably have a more understanding of Amethyst's character. Because I can guarantee you the rivalry between her and Jasper is probably one of the most important elements in this season. I'm giving this episode a 9 out of 10.